A courtroom packed with cameras, a pregnant woman standing alone, and then the slap heard around the world. When a billionaire's mistress attacks his wife in open court, everyone thinks the story is over. The powerful man wins, the victim loses. That's how it always goes, right? Wrong. Because what no one knew was that this woman had something her husband never expected. Evidence, allies, and a refusal to stay silent. What happens next will restore your faith in justice. Before we dive in, hit that subscribe button and drop a comment telling us where you are watching from. You won't believe how this ends. This is the story of Claire Bennett, and this is how she brought down an empire. The courtroom was silent except for the clicking of camera shutters. Rows of reporters filled the gallery, their microphones aimed forward like weapons. Claire Bennett sat at the plaintiff's table, both hands resting protectively on the swell of her 7-month pregnancy. Her simple navy dress was professional, modest, a stark contrast to the woman across the aisle. Natalie Grant wore red, a tailored crimson suit that caught every flash from the cameras. Her dark hair fell in perfect waves over her shoulders, and her lipstick matched her outfit exactly. She leaned close to Derek Ashford, whispering something that made him smirk. Claire's husband, her soon-to-be ex-husband, the man who had promised her forever 4 years and 8 months ago. Claire's attorney, Victor Brennan, shuffled papers beside her. He was 58, gray-haired, experienced. He had assured her this would be straightforward. A simple divorce hearing, evidence of infidelity, fair division of assets. But nothing about today felt simple. Judge Margaret Holloway entered, and everyone stood. She was a stern woman in her 50s with sharp eyes that missed nothing. She took her seat and gestured for everyone else to do the same. The proceedings began with technical language and legal formalities that blurred together in Claire's mind. Then Natalie stood. She moved with the confidence of someone who had never lost a case, or a man. She approached the bench with a folder in her hand, her heels clicking against the marble floor. Each step seemed calculated for maximum effect. "Your Honor," Natalie began, her voice smooth as silk. "Before we proceed, I'd like to submit updated documentation regarding the prenuptial agreement signed by Mrs. Ashford 2 years ago." Claire's stomach dropped. Victor leaned forward immediately. "Objection, Your Honor. There was no prenuptial agreement in this marriage." Natalie smiled. It was the smile of a predator who had already tasted blood. "Actually, there was, signed March 15th, 2 years ago. Notarized and legally binding." She handed the document to the bailiff, who delivered it to the judge. Claire felt the world tilting. March 15th, 2 years ago, she had been in the hospital recovering from a miscarriage. She had been medicated, grieving, barely able to sign her name on medical consent forms. Victor grabbed the copy handed to him and scanned it quickly. His face went pale. Claire watched him read, her heart pounding so hard she thought everyone in the courtroom must be able to hear it. "Your Honor," Victor said, his voice tight. "My client was under extreme emotional and physical duress when this document was allegedly signed. She had just suffered a traumatic pregnancy loss." "Allegedly," Natalie's voice dripped with mock offense. "The signature is verified. The notary is available to testify." Mrs. Ashford signed willingly. Claire's mind raced back to that horrible day. Derek had come to the hospital with papers. Insurance forms, he had said, just routine documents that needed updating after the miscarriage. She had been so lost in grief, she had barely looked at them. She had trusted him. Judge Holloway examined the document carefully. "This prenup states that in the event of divorce before the 5th anniversary, Mrs. Ashford forfeits all claims to marital assets. Is that correct?" "Yes, Your Honor," Natalie confirmed. "They've been married 4 years and 8 months. The prenup is fully enforceable." Claire felt tears burning behind her eyes. 4 years and 8 months. He had planned this. He had been counting the months, waiting until it was close enough to the 5-year mark that she would not suspect, but far enough that the prenup would still apply. But Natalie was not finished. She pulled out another sheet of paper. "Additionally, Your Honor, there's a clause stating that if Ms. Ashford engages in infidelity or bears a child from an extramarital relationship, she forfeits all rights immediately." The implication hung in the air like poison gas. Claire gasped. "That's not, I never—" Victor put a hand on her arm, silencing her. "Your Honor, this is outrageous. There is absolutely no evidence. We're simply stating the terms of the agreement. Natalie interrupted smoothly. Of course, the paternity test will clarify everything, unless Mrs. Ashford has a reason to refuse one. Claire stood abruptly, her chair scraping against the floor. Every camera in the room swung toward her. That baby is Derek's. I have never been unfaithful. Never. Derek finally looked at her. His expression was blank, cold, as if she were a stranger. He turned back to Natalie and whispered something. They both smiled. Judge Holloway struck her gavel. Mrs. Ashford, please sit down. We will address the validity of this prenuptial agreement in all related claims through proper legal channels. Court is adjourned until tomorrow morning. 9 o'clock sharp. The gavel struck again, and the courtroom erupted into chaos. Reporters shouted questions. Camera flashes exploded like fireworks. Victor was already on his phone, barking orders to someone on his legal team. Claire sat frozen, staring at the woman in red across the aisle. Natalie was packing her briefcase, casual and unhurried, as if she had just won a tennis match rather than destroyed someone's life. As people began filing out, Natalie walked past Claire's table. She paused, leaning down just enough that only Claire could hear her whisper, "You should have left when you had the chance. Now you'll leave with nothing." Before Claire could respond, Natalie straightened and walked away, her red suit disappearing into the crowd of reporters waiting outside. Claire's hands trembled as she gathered her own papers. Victor was still on the phone, pacing near the windows. She felt utterly alone, sitting in that courtroom where her marriage had just been dissected and dismissed. Outside, the courthouse steps were swarmed with media. Claire could hear them through the heavy doors, shouting Derek's name, asking for comments about the prenup, speculating about the pregnancy. She knew she would have to walk through that gauntlet to get to her car. Victor finally hung up and returned to her side. "We're going to fight this. Claire, the prenup was signed under duress. You were medicated, grieving. Any reasonable judge will see that." But Judge Holloway had not seemed sympathetic. She had seemed cold, procedural, interested only in the law as it was written, not as it should be applied. Claire placed both hands on her belly, feeling her baby move inside her. "What if we lose? Victor, what if the prenup holds?" He did not answer right away. That silence told her everything she needed to know. "Then we prove the baby is Derek's, and we fight for child support. Custody. You won't walk away with nothing. Claire, I promise you that." But promises meant nothing anymore. Derek had promised to love her, to stand by her through sickness and health, to be a partner, a father, a man of honor. All of those promises had turned to ash. The deposition had been scheduled for 9 in the morning, but Claire arrived at 7:30. She could not sleep, could not eat, could barely think about anything except the prenup and what it meant. Victor had called her 3 times the night before, reassuring her that they had a strong case for invalidating it. But reassurances did nothing to calm the panic clawing at her chest. The law offices of Sterling and Hale occupied the 20th floor of a glass tower downtown. Claire rode the elevator alone, watching the city shrink beneath her through the transparent walls. She felt like she was ascending to her own execution. Victor met her in the lobby, 2 cups of coffee in his hands. He handed her one, though she knew she would not drink it. Her stomach had been in knots since yesterday. "Derek's team wants to negotiate before we go back to court," Victor said as they walked toward the conference room. "They know the prenup is vulnerable. I think they're going to offer a settlement." Claire wanted to feel hopeful, but hope had become a dangerous thing. What kind of settlement? We'll find out. The conference room was all glass and steel, with a view of the harbor in the distance. Derek was already there, sitting at the head of the long table like he was chairing a board meeting. Natalie sat to his right, her red suit replaced today with black. She looked like she was attending a funeral. Claire's funeral. They sat down across from each other, and for a moment, no one spoke. Claire stared at the man she had married. He had changed in the months since he left. Or maybe she was just seeing him clearly for the first time. His jaw was set, his expression carefully neutral. He would not look directly at her. Natalie broke the silence. "Let's get straight to business. My client is prepared to offer a one-time settlement of $250,000. In exchange, Mrs. Ashford relinquishes all claims to marital assets, business interests, and real property. She will also agree to joint custody with my client at retaining primary physical custody. Claire's coffee cup hit the table harder than she intended. Primary custody of my baby. The child's paternity has not been established, Natalie said smoothly. Until it is, we cannot assume. I told you yesterday that baby is Derek's. Claire's voice was shaking now, but she did not care. I have never been with anyone else, not once in 4 years. Derek finally spoke. Then you won't have a problem taking a paternity test. His voice was so calm, so detached, as if they were discussing a business transaction and not the child they had created together. The child she had wanted so desperately after losing the first one. Victor leaned forward. A paternity test takes time. Weeks. You're asking my client to wait in legal limbo while we verify the truth. Natalie interrupted. Surely you can understand why my client would want certainty before committing to financial obligations. Claire felt something crack inside her. Financial obligations. Derek, this is your child. Our child. How can you sit there and talk about him like he's a line item on a spreadsheet? For the first time, Derek met her eyes. What she saw there made her blood run cold. There was nothing. No warmth. No regret. No recognition of the years they had spent building a life together. He looked at her the way he might look at a stranger asking for directions. You were always too emotional, Claire. That's why this marriage didn't work. You made everything a crisis, a drama. I need stability, calm, someone who understands that business comes first. Business, Claire repeated softly. Is that what Natalie is, business? Natalie's smile was sharp enough to draw blood. I'm Mr. Ashford's legal counsel. Nothing more? You're a liar. The words came out before Claire could stop them. I saw the photos. The two of you at that gala in New York, at the hotel in Boston. You think I don't know what's been happening? Natalie did not even blink. Photos can be misleading. Mr. Ashford and I work closely together. We travel for business. If you chose to interpret that as something inappropriate, that says more about your state of mind than it does about us. Victor cut in before Claire could respond. Your Honor will not look kindly on this attempt to gaslight my client. We have evidence of the affair, hotel records, credit card statements showing dinners for two, gifts purchased, all business expenses, Natalie said. Properly documented and tax deductible. You're welcome to review the receipts. The trap was so elegant Claire almost admired it. They had covered their tracks perfectly. Every illicit dinner had been disguised as a business meeting. Every hotel room was in Derek's name alone, paid for with corporate cards. On paper, there was no affair. Just a CEO and his attorney working long hours to build an empire. Claire felt the room closing in on her. The prenup, the paternity accusations. Now this. They had thought of everything. We're not accepting your settlement, Victor said firmly. We'll see you in court tomorrow. Natalie gathered her papers with exaggerated care. That's your right, of course. But I should warn you, Mr. Brennan, tomorrow we'll be presenting evidence that may be difficult for your client to hear. What evidence? Victor demanded. Testimony regarding Mrs. Ashford's mental state, her history of emotional instability, her obsessive behavior during the marriage. We have witnesses prepared to speak to her volatility. Claire's breath caught. What witnesses? Who would say that about me? Natalie stood, smoothing her skirt. You'll find out tomorrow. I suggest you prepare your client for some uncomfortable revelations. She walked out, and Derek followed without a word. Not a goodbye. Not even a glance back. Claire sat in the empty conference room, staring at the harbor through the windows. Victor was making phone calls again, trying to find out who these mystery witnesses might be. But Claire already knew it did not matter. Derek and Natalie had orchestrated this perfectly. Every move calculated, every exit blocked. Her phone buzzed. A text from Stephanie Wells, her best friend and the only person who had stood by her through all of this. How did it go? Claire stared at the message for a long moment before typing back. They're going to destroy me. Her hands moved to her belly, feeling the gentle flutter of movement inside. I'm so sorry, baby, she whispered. I'm so sorry I can't protect you from this. But even as she said it, something hardened in her chest. a small spark of anger beginning to burn through the fear. They wanted to destroy her. Fine, but she would not make it easy. The courthouse steps were already crowded when Claire arrived the next morning. News vans lined the street. Their satellite dishes pointed skyward like mechanical flowers seeking sun. Reporters recognized her immediately, surging forward with microphones and cameras. "Mrs. Ashford, is it true you signed a prenup? Are you refusing the paternity test? How do you respond to allegations of emotional instability?" Victor gripped her elbow, steering her through the crowd. "No comments. Please step aside." Inside, the courtroom was packed. Every seat in the gallery filled with journalists, legal observers, and people who had simply come to watch a public dismantling. Claire felt their eyes on her as she walked to the plaintiff's table. She kept her spine straight, her chin up, even though everything inside her wanted to run. Derek entered moments later through a side door, bypassing the media circus entirely. Natalie was with him, and today she had returned to red, the color of blood and victory. Judge Holloway called the court to order. "We're here to continue proceedings in the matter of Bennett versus Ashford. Miss Grant, I understand you have witnesses." "Yes, Your Honor." The defense calls Dr. Philip Morrison. Claire's stomach dropped. Dr. Morrison, her therapist, the man she had trusted with her deepest fears and darkest moments after the miscarriage. A tall man in his 60s entered the courtroom, walking to the witness stand with the confidence of someone who had testified many times before. He was sworn in, and Natalie approached him with a folder in her hands. "Dr. Morrison, can you confirm that you treated Claire Ashford for approximately 8 months following a pregnancy loss?" "Yes, that's correct." "And during that treatment, did Mrs. Ashford exhibit signs of emotional instability?" Victor shot to his feet. "Objection. Therapist-patient privilege." "Mrs. Ashford signed a waiver," Natalie said smoothly, producing a document. "When she began therapy, she authorized Dr. Morrison to share information with her husband for the purposes of coordinated care." Claire's mind raced. She remembered signing forms at the first session, but she had been so lost in grief she had barely read them. Another trap she had walked into blind. Judge Holloway examined the waiver. "The objection is overruled. Dr. Morrison, you may answer." The therapist cleared his throat. "Mrs. Ashford was experiencing severe depression and anxiety following her miscarriage. She expressed feelings of worthlessness and occasionally mentioned intrusive thoughts about self-harm." The courtroom murmured. Claire felt tears burning behind her eyes. Those sessions had been her lifeline, the one place she could be honest about the darkness that had consumed her after losing the baby. Now those private confessions were being used as evidence that she was unfit. Natalie continued. "Did she ever express anger toward her husband?" "Yes. She felt he was not emotionally available during her recovery. She used words like cold and distant to describe him." "Did she ever express fantasies about hurting him?" Claire's breath stopped. Victor was on his feet again. "Your Honor, this is outrageous. Mrs. Ashford wrote in her journal, which she shared with me during sessions, that sometimes she wished Derek would feel the pain she felt. In context, I understood this as a desire for emotional recognition, not physical harm. But the language was, at times, concerning." The damage was done. Claire could see it in the faces of the people around her. The journalists were typing furiously. The gallery was whispering. Even Judge Holloway looked troubled. Natalie smiled. "No further questions." Victor's cross-examination tried to provide context, to explain that grief often came with complicated emotions. Dr. Morrison agreed, acknowledging that Claire had never been a danger to herself or others, but the seed had been planted, unstable, volatile, possibly dangerous. When Dr. Morrison stepped down, Natalie called her next witness. The defense calls Rachel Torres. A young woman entered the courtroom, nervous and avoiding eye contact. Claire recognized her immediately. Rachel had been Derek's executive assistant until 3 months ago when she had suddenly quit. Rachel took the stand and was sworn in. Natalie approached her gently, as if handling something fragile. "Miss Torres, you worked for Derek Ashford for 2 years. Is that correct?" "Yes." "During that time, did you have occasion to interact with his wife, Claire Ashford?" Rachel nodded, her voice barely above a whisper. "She called the office sometimes, and she came by a few times. Can you describe those interactions? Rachel glanced at Claire, then quickly looked away. She seemed upset a lot. She would call and demand to know where Derek was, who he was meeting with. One time she came to the office and accused him of lying to her about a business trip. Was he lying, Go? No, he was exactly where he said he would be. I had booked the travel myself. Natalie let that hang in the air for a moment. Did Mrs. Ashford ever threaten your employer? Objection, Victor said wearily. Leading the witness. I'll rephrase. Did Mrs. Ashford ever say anything that made you uncomfortable regarding your employer's safety? Rachel hesitated. This was the moment Claire realized the young woman had been coached. Her discomfort was real, but her words had been carefully prepared. She said once that if he left her, she would make sure everyone knew what kind of man he really was. She said she would ruin him. The courtroom exploded with whispers. Claire shook her head, trying to remember that conversation. There had been a fight. Yes, Derek had come home late again, smelling of perfume that was not hers. She had been angry, hurt, desperate, but she had never threatened him. She had only wanted the truth. I didn't, Claire whispered to Victor. I never said that. But no one was listening to her. They were listening to Rachel, who was describing Claire as paranoid, obsessive, irrational. Every incident twisted just enough to sound damning. When Victor cross-examined, Rachel admitted she had been paid a severance package when she left Derek's company. $50,000, significantly more than her contract required. Isn't it true, Victor pressed, that you were paid to testify today? I was paid for my service to the company, Rachel said, but her voice wavered. This testimony is separate. It was not enough. The jury of public opinion had already formed. After Rachel stepped down, Judge Holloway called a recess. Claire stood on shaking legs, needing air, needing space. She headed toward the hallway, Victor following close behind. Near the bathroom, Natalie appeared. She had been waiting. You should take the settlement, Claire. $250,000. It's more than you deserve. Frankly, but Derek wants to be generous. Take it and disappear. Claire stared at the woman who had stolen her husband and was now trying to steal her future. I'll never take anything from you. Natalie stepped closer, her voice dropping to a whisper. Then you'll take nothing at all. And when that baby is born, we'll fight for custody. Derek has resources you can't imagine. Lawyers, money. Witnesses, you'll be lucky to get supervised visitation. The threat was clear, and in that moment, Claire understood that this was never about the prenup or the divorce. This was about power, about making sure she was completely destroyed so she could never come back. Court is resuming, a bailiff called from down the hall. Claire walked back into the courtroom, each step feeling like walking toward her own execution. But before she could sit down, something inside her snapped. She turned to face Natalie, who was smiling that predatory smile, and Claire spoke loud enough for everyone to hear. You can take everything from me, my money, my home, my dignity, but you will never take my child. Never. Natalie's smile widened. We'll see about that. And then, in front of a courtroom full of witnesses and cameras, Natalie Grant did something that would change everything. She slapped Claire across the face. The sound echoed through the courtroom like a gunshot. Claire stumbled backward, her hand flying to her cheek. The room erupted into chaos. Reporters jumped to their feet. Cameras flashed. Someone screamed. Judge Holloway's gavel slammed down. Order bailiff. Restrain Miss Grant immediately. But the damage was done. Claire stood there, 7 months pregnant, with a red handprint blooming across her face. And Derek sat motionless at his table, not moving to help, not saying a word. The cameras captured it all. The slap became a wildfire within hours. Video footage spread across social media faster than Claire could process what had happened. By evening, she was trending on 3 platforms. The headline screamed in all caps, "Lawyer slaps pregnant woman in court. Billionaire's wife assaulted during divorce hearing. Judge outraged as mistress attacks victim." Claire sat in Stephanie's apartment, an ice pack pressed to her swollen cheek, watching her humiliation play on loop across every news channel. Stephanie had picked her up from the courthouse after Judge Holloway adjourned the proceedings in fury. Natalie had been led away by bailiffs, charged with contempt and assault, but that small victory felt hollow. "Turn it off," Claire whispered. Stephanie grabbed the remote, and the screen went dark. The silence that followed was worse than the noise. Claire could still hear the slap echoing in her mind, could still see Derek's face, blank and unmoved, as she stood there bleeding from where Natalie's ring had cut her cheekbone. "Victor called," Stephanie said gently. "He says this helps your case." Natalie showed her true character in front of everyone. The judge was livid. "It doesn't matter." Claire's voice was hollow. "Derek has already won. The prenup, the witnesses, all of it. He planned this perfectly. Claire, he married me knowing he would leave before the 5-year mark. He trapped me with that prenup when I was vulnerable. He turned my grief into evidence of insanity. He bought testimony from people I trusted." The words tumbled out, each one a fresh wound. "And I walked into every trap because I loved him, because I believed he loved me back." Stephanie knelt beside the couch, taking Claire's hand. "You're not crazy. You're not unstable. You're a woman who was betrayed by someone she trusted. There's a difference." But was there, Claire thought about Dr. Morrison's testimony, the journal entries that had been taken out of context, the phone calls to Derek's office that now sounded paranoid instead of justified. Every action she had taken to save her marriage had been twisted into evidence of her unfitness. Her phone buzzed. Another message from an unknown number. She had been getting them all afternoon. "Gold digger, you got what you deserved." Fake victim playing for sympathy. Stephanie grabbed the phone and turned it off. "You need to stop reading those. They're bots and trolls. They don't matter." But they did matter, because tomorrow she would walk back into that courtroom, and everyone would remember the narrative that had been built around her. Unstable wife, paranoid woman, possibly unfit mother. "I need to lie down," Claire said. Stephanie helped her to the spare bedroom, a small space with white walls and a single window overlooking an alley. It was nothing like the penthouse she had shared with Derek. No marble countertops or floor-to-ceiling windows, no designer furniture or original artwork. But it was safe, and right now that was all she needed. She lay on the bed, one hand on her belly. The baby was moving, restless as if sensing her distress. "I'm sorry, Omwari," she whispered. "I'm sorry I brought you into this mess. I'm sorry your father is a monster and I was too blind to see it." Her phone buzzed again even though Stephanie had turned it off. No, not her phone. The landline in the kitchen. Through the thin walls, she could hear Stephanie answering. "No, she's not available for comment. Please stop calling this number." More reporters. More people wanting to pick apart the carcass of her life for entertainment. Claire closed her eyes and tried to remember when things had been good between her and Derek. Their wedding day, the honeymoon in Greece, the morning she told him about the first pregnancy and he had picked her up and spun her around with joy. But those memories felt like they belonged to someone else now, some naive girl who had believed in happy endings. The next morning, Claire returned to court with Victor by her side. The media presence had doubled. Police barricades held back the crowd, but she could still hear them shouting questions. Some supportive, many cruel. Inside, Derek was already seated. He looked tired. She noticed. Dark circles under his eyes that even his expensive concealer could not quite hide. Good. She hoped he was not sleeping. Hoped some small part of him felt guilt for what he was doing. Natalie was absent. Of course. Still in custody awaiting a bail hearing. A different attorney sat beside Derek now. An older man named Edward Pritchard, who looked like he had been pulled out of retirement for this. Judge Holloway entered, and her expression was thunderous. "Before we proceed, I want to make something absolutely clear. This courtroom will maintain order and professionalism. What happened yesterday was unacceptable, inexcusable. If anyone, and I mean anyone, steps out of line again, they will be held in contempt. Am I understood?" Everyone murmured agreement. "Good. Mr. Brennan, you may present your case." Victor stood. He had spent all night preparing, calling in favors, building a strategy. "Your Honor, we move to have the prenuptial agreement declared invalid on the grounds that it was signed under duress. Mrs. Ashford was heavily medicated at the time, grieving a traumatic pregnancy loss, and did not have independent legal counsel review the document before signing." He presented medical records from the hospital, prescription logs showing the pain medication and anti-anxiety drugs Claire had been taking. Testimony from nurses who remembered how fragile she had been. It was strong, compelling. Claire felt the first flicker of hope in days. Then Edward Pritchard stood. Your Honor, Mrs. Ashford was competent enough to sign medical consent forms during that same hospital stay, forms that required her to understand complex medical procedures and their risks. She was not incapacitated. She was grieving, yes, but grief does not equal incompetence. He presented the medical consent forms, signed in Claire's handwriting, the same shaky signature that appeared on the prenup. Judge Holloway studied the documents for a long time. When she finally looked up, her expression was neutral. I'm going to take this under advisement. We'll resume tomorrow morning, at which point I'll rule on the validity of the prenuptial agreement. Court is adjourned. The gavel struck. Claire felt something inside her crumble. Under advisement, it meant the judge was uncertain. Meant there was a real chance the prenup would stand. Outside, Victor tried to be encouraging. Holloway is being cautious. That's actually good. She's taking it seriously. But Claire barely heard him. She was watching Derek get into a black town car, Edward Pritchard beside him. Through the tinted window, she could see Derek on his phone, laughing at something, laughing, while her entire world collapsed. He was laughing. That night, Claire could not sleep. She lay in Stephanie's spare bed, staring at the ceiling, trying to figure out what she would do if she lost it everything. $250,000 would not last long with a baby. Not in this city. She would have to move somewhere cheaper. Find work. But who would hire a pregnant woman with no recent work experience in a very public, very messy divorce? Around midnight, her phone buzzed. She had turned it back on, unable to help herself despite Stephanie's warnings. The message was from an unknown number. I worked for Derek. I know what he did. I can help you, but we need to meet in person. Alone tomorrow, 2 p.m., coffee shop on 5th and Madison. Come alone or I walk. Claire stared at the message, her heart pounding. It could be a trap, another setup. But what did she have to lose? Everything, a voice whispered in her mind. You have everything to lose. But she was already losing everything anyway. She texted back, I'll be there. The coffee shop was small and tucked between two larger buildings, the kind of place people walked past without noticing. Claire arrived 15 minutes early and chose a table in the back corner where she could see the door. Her hands shook as she held her decaf latte, unable to drink it. At 2 o'clock exactly, a young woman entered. Mid-20s, dark hair pulled into a professional bun, wearing a gray pantsuit that looked expensive but not showy. She scanned the room until her eyes landed on Claire, Rachel Torres. Claire's stomach dropped. The woman who had testified against her, who had described her as paranoid and threatening, who had been paid $50,000 to destroy her credibility. Rachel walked over and sat down without asking. Up close, she looked exhausted, frightened. Nothing like the confident witness from the courtroom. You shouldn't be here, Claire said coldly. You've done enough damage. I know. Rachel's voice was barely above a whisper. I know what you must think of me, but I didn't have a choice. Everyone has a choice. Not when Derek Ashford threatens to destroy your career and your family. Rachel pulled out her phone with trembling hands. He made me sign an NDA, said if I ever spoke about what I really knew, he would sue me into the ground. He would make sure I never worked again. He showed me what he did to the last assistant who crossed him. She ended up bankrupt and homeless. Claire wanted to walk away, but something in Rachel's eyes stopped her. Terror. Real, bone-deep terror. Why are you here, Claire insisted? Because what I said on that stand was a lie, and I can't live with it anymore. Rachel unlocked her phone and turned the screen toward Claire. Everything I testified about you being paranoid and threatening. Derek told me to say that. He coached me for hours, paid me to quit so there would be no conflict of interest. But the truth is, you were right about everything. On the screen was an email from Derek to Rachel. The subject line read, handle the Claire problem. Claire read it, her heart hammering. Derek instructing Rachel to document every time Claire called the office, to record conversations if possible, to make note of anything that could be used to paint Claire as unstable. The email was dated 18 months ago, long before the divorce. He had been building his case for that long. There's more, Rachel said. She swiped to another email. This one included financial statements. Derek has been hiding assets in offshore accounts for 3 years. Shell companies registered in the Cayman Islands. Millions of dollars that aren't part of the marital estate because they're technically owned by corporations that don't exist. Claire felt dizzy. Why would he do that? Because he always planned to leave you before the 5-year mark. The prenup was his safety net, but he wanted to make sure you got nothing even if the prenup failed. So he moved everything where you couldn't touch it. More emails, more evidence. Derek discussing the prenup strategy with Natalie. Derek instructing his accountant to forge documents. Derek laughing in a text message about how Claire had no idea what was coming. "Why are you showing me this?" Claire asked. "You signed an NDA. He'll destroy you." Rachel's eyes filled with tears. "I have a little sister. She's 17. When Derek found out she existed, he used her as leverage. Said if I didn't cooperate, he would make sure she never got into college. He has connections everywhere." I was terrified. And now I'm more terrified of living with what I did to you. I watched you in that courtroom. I saw what my testimony did. You're pregnant and alone and being destroyed by a monster. I can't be part of that anymore. Claire stared at the emails, her mind racing. This was evidence, real evidence that could change everything, but it was also stolen. Rachel had violated her NDA by sharing it. "Have you ever felt completely powerless?" Claire asked quietly. It was a question for the world beyond this coffee shop, for anyone who had ever been trapped by someone with more money and power. Rachel nodded. "Every day since I started working for him." Claire made a decision. "We need to take this to my lawyer. Today, right now." "There's something else." Rachel pulled out a flash drive. Recordings, Derek and Natalie discussing how to manipulate Dr. Morrison's testimony, how to edit my statements to sound worse than they were. Everything. Dr. Morrison was in on it. No, but Derek knew which parts of your therapy to emphasize. He had Natalie request specific information under that medical release you signed. They cherry-picked everything to make you sound dangerous. Claire felt rage building in her chest. Not the helpless anger of the past few days, but something colder, sharper, useful. "Victor's office is 10 minutes from here," Claire said. "We're going now." Rachel hesitated. "If I do this, Derek will come after me. He'll sue. He'll make my life hell." "He's already making your life hell. You just don't realize it yet because you're still under his control. But the moment you stop being useful, he'll destroy you anyway. This way, at least you go down fighting." It was the truth, and Rachel knew it. She stood, clutching her phone and flash drive like lifelines. "Okay, let's go." They left the coffee shop together. Two women who had been pitted against each other by a man who cared for neither of them. But now they were allies, and they were angry. Victor's office was controlled chaos when they arrived. Legal assistants hurried between rooms carrying files. Phones rang constantly. In the center of it all was Victor, barking instructions into 2 different phones simultaneously. He looked up when Claire and Rachel entered. His eyes widened. "Claire, what's going on? Who is this?" "This is Rachel Torres, and she has evidence that's going to change everything." They spent the next 4 hours going through every email, every recording, every document Rachel had brought. Victor's expression shifted from skeptical to shocked to furious as the scope of Derek's deception became clear. "This is fraud," Victor said finally. "This is conspiracy. This goes beyond divorce court. We're talking criminal charges." "Can we use it?" Claire asked. Rachel violated her NDA. "The NDA is void if it was used to conceal criminal activity." Victor interrupted. "And Derek's financial manipulation definitely qualifies. Plus, we have recordings of him and Natalie conspiring to present false testimony. That's obstruction of justice." Rachel had gone pale. "He's going to come after me." Victor shook his head. "Not if we move fast." Claire, I need your permission to contact the FBI. This is bigger than your divorce now. This is about holding a powerful man accountable for systematic fraud." Claire thought about the baby growing inside her. About the life she wanted to build for her child. A life where truth mattered, where justice existed. "Do it," she said. Victor made the call. Within 2 hours, federal agents were in his office, taking statements from Rachel, copying files, beginning an investigation that would eventually encompass not just Derek, but dozens of shell companies and hidden accounts. As the sun set outside Victor's windows, Claire felt something she had not felt in months. Hope. Not the fragile, desperate hope she had clung to before, but something solid, real, built on evidence and truth instead of wishes. "What happens now?" she asked Victor. "Now we go back to court tomorrow, and we blow Derek's entire strategy apart. The prenup won't matter when the judge sees evidence of fraud. His character witnesses won't matter when we play recordings of him conspiring to lie. None of it will matter because the truth is finally coming out." Rachel was crying quietly in the corner, relief and terror mixing on her face. Stephanie had arrived an hour ago and was sitting with her, offering tissues and reassurance. Claire walked to the window and looked out at the city. Somewhere out there, Derek was probably celebrating, probably thinking he had already won, that tomorrow would just be a formality before Claire accepted defeat and disappeared from his life. He had no idea what was coming. And for the first time since this nightmare began, Claire smiled. Claire barely slept that night. She lay in Stephanie's spare bed, replaying everything Rachel had revealed. The emails, the recordings, the systematic deception that had begun years before Derek asked for a divorce. He had been planning this since before their 3rd anniversary, maybe longer. At dawn, she gave up on sleep and made tea in Stephanie's small kitchen. Through the window, the city was waking up. Delivery trucks rumbled past. A jogger ran by with a dog. Normal people living normal lives while Claire's entire existence hung in the balance. Her phone buzzed. "Victor, don't come to court today." Claire's stomach dropped. "What, why, Mom?" "Derek's team filed an emergency motion this morning. They were claiming you violated the custody arrangement by meeting with Rachel yesterday. They have photos of the two of you at the coffee shop." "We don't have a custody arrangement yet. I'm still pregnant." "They're arguing that your contact with a witness constitutes harassment and witness tampering. It's garbage, but Judge Holloway has to hear it. She moved our hearing to this afternoon. Stay home. Don't go anywhere. Don't talk to anyone." Claire sank into a chair. "They were following me." "Probably, well, Derek has the resources to hire private investigators. But Claire, this is actually good. It means he's scared. He knows Rachel talked to you. He's panicking. It doesn't feel good. It feels like I can't breathe without him knowing about it. Just stay put. I'll handle this." The call ended. Claire sat in the silent apartment, feeling the walls close in, even when she tried to fight back. Derek was 3 steps ahead, watching, waiting, countering every move. Her phone buzzed again. This time, an unknown number. She almost didn't answer, but something made her pick up. "Mrs. Ashford." A woman's voice. Unfamiliar. "Who is this?" "My name is Jennifer Blake. I'm a reporter with the Metropolitan Tribune. I'd like to talk to you about your divorce case." No comment. Claire moved to hang up. "Wait, please. I'm not looking for gossip. I've been investigating Derek Ashford for 2 years. Financial irregularities, buried lawsuits, women who worked for him and then suddenly disappeared from public life. I think you might be able to help me connect the dots." Claire hesitated. "What kind of lawsuits?" "Sexual harassment, wrongful termination, all settled out of court with massive NDAs attached. I've found 3 so far, but I suspect there are more. Women who tried to speak up and were silenced with money and legal threats." Rachel's terrified face flashed through Claire's mind. The way she had described Derek threatening her sister, the fear in her voice when she talked about the last assistant who crossed him. "I can't talk to you, Brian," Claire said. "I'm in the middle of divorce proceedings. Anything I say could be used against me. I understand, but if you change your mind or if you know anyone else who might want to talk, please call me." Jennifer gave her a number. "What Derek Ashford has done to you is public, but what he's done to other women is hidden. Someone needs to shine a light on it." The call ended. Claire stared at her phone, mind racing. How many other women, how many others had Derek destroyed and buried with NDAs and payoffs? At noon, Victor called again. "Emergency hearing is in an hour. I still want you to stay away, but I wanted to update you." Rachel gave her statement to the FBI this morning. "They're moving fast, subpoenaing Derek's financial records, freezing some of his accounts pending investigation." "That's good, right? It's very good. But it also means Derek knows the walls are closing in. People do desperate things when they're cornered. I need you to be careful. I'm alone in Stephanie's apartment. What can he do to me here? Just promise me you'll keep the door locked and don't let anyone in. She promised. But as the afternoon wore on, she felt increasingly trapped. The apartment was small, one bedroom, one bathroom, a kitchen barely big enough to turn around in. The walls seemed to press closer with every passing hour. At 3 o'clock, her phone rang. Victor, and his voice was tight with controlled fury. Judge Holloway dismissed Derek's motion, called it frivolous and a waste of the court's time. She's not happy with his legal team right now. Relief flooded through Claire. That's good news. There's more. Edward Pritchard quit, resigned from Derek's case this morning, said he didn't sign up to defend financial fraud. So Derek has no lawyer. He'll find another one, but it's going to take time. Judge Holloway is giving him until next week to secure new counsel, which means we have time to build our case with Rachel's evidence. Claire closed her eyes. Maybe, just maybe. The tide was turning, but then Victor's voice dropped. Claire, there's something else. Derek tried to have Rachel arrested this morning, claimed she stole company property when she took those emails. FBI intervened and took her into protective custody. She's safe, but Derek is actively trying to silence her. The relief evaporated. Protective custody. For how long? As long as the investigation takes. But it means she's a federal witness now. This is bigger than your divorce. Derek could be looking at serious criminal charges. After Victor hung up, Claire sat in the dimming apartment, processing everything. Rachel was in protective custody. Derek's lawyer had quit. Federal investigations were underway. It should have felt like victory. But all she could think about was how dangerous a cornered animal became. At 7 that evening, Stephanie came home from her shift at the hospital. She looked exhausted, her scrubs wrinkled, her hair escaping from its ponytail, but she smiled when she saw Claire. Victor called me, said things went well today. Claire nodded. They did, but I can't shake this feeling that something's about to go wrong. That's just trauma response. Your body is still in fight or flight mode because you've been under attack for so long. But Claire, you're winning. Can you see that you're actually winning? Maybe Stephanie was right. Maybe the constant fear was just habit now, a reflex from months of being systematically destroyed. They made dinner together, a simple pasta that reminded Claire of easier times. Before Derek, before the miscarriage, before everything fell apart. They ate in comfortable silence. And for a little while, Claire almost felt normal. Then someone knocked on the door. Both women froze. Stephanie's apartment was 3 floors up. No doorman, no security, just a buzzer downstairs that visitors had to use to be let in. Did you buzz someone up? Claire whispered. Stephanie shook her head. She moved to the door carefully and looked through the peephole. Her face went pale. It's Derek. Claire's blood turned to ice. What? How did he get up here? I don't know. Someone must have let him in when they were leaving. Another knock. Harder this time. Claire, I know you're in there. We need to talk. Don't open it, Claire said. Stephanie already had her phone out, dialing 911. She spoke quietly into it, giving the address, saying there was an unwanted person trying to force entry. Claire, Derek's voice through the door was calm. Too calm. The voice he used when he was about to close a business deal or fire an employee. This is ridiculous. I just want to talk. 5 minutes. That's all I'm asking. I have nothing to say to you, Claire called back. Leave or I'm calling the police. The police, he laughed. For what knocking on a door, Claire? You're being paranoid again. Just like Dr. Morrison said. The words hit like physical blows. Stephanie squeezed Claire's hand. Sir, you need to leave, Stephanie shouted through the door. The police have been called. Silence. Then the sound of footsteps moving away, receding down the hallway, the distant ding of the elevator. 5 minutes later, 2 police officers arrived. They took statements, checked the hallway, confirmed Derek had left the building. One officer, a woman in her 40s with kind eyes, stayed behind after her partner left. Ma'am, do you have a restraining order against this man? Not yet. We're in the middle of divorce proceedings. I'd recommend getting one. What he did tonight, showing up uninvited, refusing to leave when asked, that's harassment. And given that you're pregnant and he's a party in a very contentious legal case, a judge would likely grant a temporary order. After the officer left, Claire and Stephanie checked every window lock, every door, every possible entry point. The apartment suddenly felt less like a refuge and more like a trap. "You should go to a hotel," Stephanie said. "Somewhere he can't find you." "I can't afford a hotel, not until the court unfreezes the joint accounts." "I'll pay?" "Steph, you've already done so much." "I'm not asking." Stephanie was already packing Claire's things. "You're going somewhere safe tonight, and we're not telling anyone where." 2 hours later, Claire was checked into a small hotel in a different neighborhood under Stephanie's name. The room was clean but basic. A bed, a desk, a bathroom barely bigger than a closet. But it had a deadbolt and a chain lock, and it was somewhere Derek didn't know about. Claire lay in the dark, one hand on her belly, feeling the baby's movements. "I'm sorry," and she whispered. "I'm sorry everything is so scary right now, but I promise you, I'm going to keep fighting, for both of us." Her phone lit up with a text. Unknown number. "Running won't save you. I always find what belongs to me." Claire's hands shook as she blocked the number. Then she turned off her phone completely. In the morning, she would file for a restraining order. She would call Victor and tell him about Derek showing up. She would keep fighting. But tonight, she just needed to survive. The restraining order hearing was scheduled for 9 in the morning. Claire arrived with Victor and a police report documenting Derek's appearance at Stephanie's apartment. She had expected it to be quick, procedural. She had not expected Derek to show up. He sat across the courtroom with his new attorney, a woman named Patricia Reeves, who looked like she specialized in aggressive litigation. Derek himself looked different. His suit was immaculate as always, but his face was drawn. The confident smugness he had worn throughout the divorce proceedings was gone, replaced by something harder. Desperate. Judge Holloway reviewed the police report and Claire's petition. "Mr. Ashford, you went to an address where you knew your estranged wife was staying and refused to leave when asked. Can you explain this behavior?" Patricia stood. "Your Honor, my client simply wished to have a conversation with his wife. There was no threat of violence, no aggressive behavior. The police report confirms he left when asked." After being asked multiple times, Judge Holloway corrected, and after forcing his way into a building where he was not invited. "Mrs. Ashford is 7 months pregnant and has expressed fear for her safety. I'm granting a temporary restraining order. Mr. Ashford, you are to stay at least 500 feet from Mrs. Ashford at all times except during scheduled court appearances. Violation will result in immediate arrest. Do you understand?" Derek's jaw tightened. "Yes, Your Honor." "Good. Now, I understand there are other matters pending in your divorce case, including some rather serious allegations of financial misconduct." Patricia jumped in. "Your Honor, those allegations are part of a separate federal investigation. We don't believe they're relevant to family court proceedings." "On the contrary," Victor said, standing, "the financial fraud goes directly to the validity of the prenuptial agreement and the division of marital assets. Our client was deliberately deceived about the true value of the marital estate." Judge Holloway studied both attorneys. "I've received notice from the FBI that Mr. Ashford's financial records have been subpoenaed. Until that investigation concludes, I'm freezing all marital assets. Neither party may liquidate, transfer, or hide any property. We'll reconvene when the federal investigation is complete." It was a partial victory. The assets were frozen, which meant Derek could not hide any more money. But it also meant Claire could not access any of it. She was still living on Stephanie's generosity and the little money she had saved before Derek cut her off. As they filed out of the courtroom, Patricia pulled Victor aside. Claire watched them talk in hushed tones, Patricia gesturing sharply, Victor shaking his head. Finally, he returned to Claire. "They want to settle. Offered $500,000 in joint custody." "No. I told them you'd say that." "But Claire, 500,000 would set you up. You could start fresh. And joint custody means you'd still have significant time with the baby." Claire watched Derek through the courtroom windows. He was on his phone, pacing, his free hand running through his hair in a gesture of frustration she knew too well. For years, she had tried to soothe that frustration, had bent herself into shapes trying to make him happy. Never again. "He stole millions from investors. He hid assets to cheat me out of what I'm legally owed. He conspired with his mistress to destroy my reputation. And you want me to take $500,000 and pretend none of that happened. I want you to be practical. The federal investigation could take months. And even if Derek is convicted, you might not see that money for years while it's tied up in restitution and legal battles. Then I'll wait, however long it takes. But I'm not letting him buy his way out of this, Victor sighed. I'll tell them no. That afternoon, Claire met with Jennifer Blake, the reporter who had called days earlier. They met in a park, walking slowly along a path beside the river. Jennifer had brought coffee and bagels, but Claire was too anxious to eat. Thank you for agreeing to meet, Jennifer said. I know this is a difficult time. You said you found other women Derek hurt. 3 that I can confirm. Emily Sanders worked as his personal assistant 5 years ago. Filed a harassment claim that was settled for $200,000. She signed an NDA and has refused to speak publicly. Maria Chen was a junior executive at his company. She complained about inappropriate touching and was fired a week later. Settled for $150,000. Also under NDA, and there's a 3rd woman, Lisa Martinez, who worked in his finance department. She discovered irregularities in the accounts, reported them to HR, and was let go for performance issues the next day. Her settlement was $300,000. Claire felt sick. How did you find all this? Court records. Most settlements have to be filed with the court even if the details are sealed. I've been tracking Derek's legal history for 2 years. Every few months, there's a new settlement, a new woman paid off and silenced. You're just the first one who hasn't settled. I'm not settling, Jennifer smiled. I was hoping you'd say that because I want to write about all of this. The pattern of abuse, the financial fraud, the way powerful men use NDAs to hide their crimes. But I need someone willing to go on record, someone brave enough to put their name on this story. What about the other women? Have you talked to them? Emily and Maria both refused to comment. They're terrified of violating their NDAs. But Lisa Martinez agreed to talk off the record. She says the financial irregularities she found went back years. Derek was using shell companies to funnel money out of his main business. Some of it was tax evasion, but some of it was just greed. Moving assets around so his wife couldn't claim them in a divorce. He planned this for years, at least 3, according to Lisa's timeline, maybe longer. They walked in silence for a while. The river sparkled in the afternoon sun. Joggers passed by. A couple sat on a bench feeding ducks. Normal life continuing while Claire's world was still on fire. If I talk to you, Claire said slowly, if I put my name on this story, Derek will retaliate. He'll find a way to hurt me. He's already hurting you. At least this way, the truth gets out. Other women who might be in similar situations will know they're not alone. And maybe, just maybe, it puts enough public pressure on him that he can't just settle and walk away this time. Claire thought about Rachel in protective custody, about the 3 women Jennifer had found who were too scared to speak, about how many others might exist, hidden behind NDAs and payoffs. Okay, she said, I'll talk to you, but I want it in writing that you're protecting Rachel Torres's identity. She's already risking everything. I won't put her in more danger. Deal. They spent the next 2 hours going through everything. The prenup trap, the weaponized therapy sessions, the courtroom slap, the midnight visit to Stephanie's apartment. Jennifer recorded it all, asking careful questions, taking notes. When they finally parted, Jennifer said, this story runs in 3 days. I want to give you a heads up so you're not blindsided. It's going to be big, front page, maybe even picked up nationally. Good, Claire said. Let everyone see what kind of man Derek Ashford really is. But as she walked back to her hotel, Claire felt a creeping sense of dread. Derek was dangerous when he was winning. What would he do when he was losing that night? She found out. At 10 o'clock, her phone rang. Victor's number. Turn on the news. Channel 7. Claire grabbed the remote. The local news was on, and her photo filled the screen. A professional headshot from years ago when she had worked in marketing. She looked young, happy, naive. The anchor's voice was grim. Breaking news tonight about Claire Ashford, the woman currently divorcing tech billionaire Derek Ashford. Sources close to the family say Mrs. Ashford has a history of mental illness, including multiple suicide attempts and psychiatric hospitalizations. The family is asking for privacy during this difficult time as they seek treatment for their loved one. Claire's hands went numb. The remote fell to the floor. It's a lie, Victor said on the phone. All of it. But someone leaked it to the press. Someone with access to sealed medical records. How is that possible? I don't know, but we're going to find out. And when we do, whoever did this is going to face serious legal consequences. But the damage was done. Within an hour, the story was everywhere. Social media exploded with speculation about Claire's mental health. The comments were vicious. Maybe she is unstable. Gold digger playing the victim. Those poor babies, being raised by someone that crazy. Claire turned off her phone and curled up on the hotel bed, crying until there were no tears left. Everything she had built, every ounce of credibility she had gained, destroyed in a single news cycle. This was Derek's countermove. His response to her decision not to settle, and it was devastatingly effective. Claire woke to her phone buzzing relentlessly. She had turned it off the night before, but Stephanie must have turned it back on during the night. Messages flooded in, voicemails, news alerts. Her inbox was exploding. Then she saw the new headline, Tech Billionaire's accounts frozen in federal fraud investigation. FBI raids Ashford Technologies headquarters. Claire sat up, her heart racing. She clicked on the article. Federal agents executed search warrants at multiple properties owned by Derek Ashford early this morning, including his company headquarters and his penthouse apartment. Sources say the investigation centers on allegations of securities fraud, tax evasion, and money laundering through offshore shell companies. The FBI has frozen accounts containing an estimated $40 million. $40 million. That was more than Claire had ever imagined. More than had been disclosed in any of the divorce paperwork. Her phone rang. Victor, did you see? I'm reading it now. $40 million. That's just what they've found so far. FBI thinks there's more. Claire, this is huge. Derek's entire empire is about to collapse. And that fake story he leaked about your mental health, that just made him look worse. People are connecting the dots. Rich man tries to destroy his pregnant wife's credibility while federal agents are investigating him for fraud. The optics are terrible. For the first time in days, Claire felt something like hope. What happens now? We wait. The FBI investigation will take time. But in the meantime, Judge Holloway wants to see us in court tomorrow. She's not happy about the media leaks from either side. Says this case is turning into a circus. After hanging up, Claire finally read through her messages. Most were from reporters asking for comment, but one was from Jennifer Blake. My article runs today at noon. Wanted you to know, you're incredibly brave. At noon, Claire sat in her hotel room with her laptop open, refreshing the Metropolitan Tribune's website until the article appeared. The women who tried to warn us inside Derek Ashford's pattern of abuse and fraud. Jennifer had done her job well. The article laid out everything. The 3 previous settlements. Rachel's testimony about Derek's manipulation. Claire's story of systematic destruction. And it ended with a powerful quote from an anonymous source. Someone high up in Derek's company. Everyone who worked closely with Derek knew he was dangerous, but he was rich and successful. So we all told ourselves it wasn't our problem. We were wrong, and a lot of people got hurt because of our silence. Within an hour, the article had been shared thousands of times. Other news outlets picked it up. Television stations wanted interviews. The story was going viral. Claire's phone rang again. This time, an unknown number. Against her better judgment, she answered, "You're going to regret this." Derek's voice was ice cold. "I will destroy you. Do you understand me? I will take everything. Your reputation, your money, your child, everything. You're violating the restraining order by calling me. I don't care anymore. You've declared war. Fine, let's see who wins." The line went dead. Claire immediately called Victor and reported the violation. Then she called the police. Within 2 hours, Derek was arrested for violating the restraining order. His bail was set at $1 million, which he posted immediately, but the arrest was public. More bad publicity piling onto an already burning dumpster fire of her reputation. That evening, Claire received a call from Lisa Martinez, the woman Jennifer had mentioned, the finance employee who had discovered the irregularities. "I saw the article, Lisa said, and I want to help. I kept copies of everything before they fired me, documents showing how Derek moved money around. I was too scared to go to the FBI before. But after reading your story, I realized I can't stay silent anymore. Are you sure he'll come after you? Let him try. I'm done being afraid. Lisa sent everything to the FBI that night. Bank records, corporate update documents, emails between Derek and his accountants discussing how to hide assets. The evidence was damning. The next morning, Claire entered the courtroom to find it more packed than ever. The gallery was full of reporters, legal observers, and people who had simply come to watch the spectacle. Derek sat at the defense table with Patricia Reeves, and for the first time, he looked truly defeated. His face was pale, his hands trembled slightly. The confidence had drained out of him like water from a broken dam. Judge Holloway entered, and her expression was thunderous. I have never, in my 23 years on the bench, seen such a blatant disregard for the legal process. Leaked medical records, violated restraining orders, witness intimidation. This case has become a mockery of everything the court stands for. She turned to Derek. Mr. Ashford, you are currently under investigation by the FBI for fraud. You have violated a restraining order, and evidence has come to light suggesting you conspired to present false testimony in these proceedings. I am seriously considering referring you to the State Bar for disciplinary action against any attorneys who participated in these schemes. Patricia started to object, but Judge Holloway cut her off. Miss Reeves, your client is in enough trouble. I suggest you advise him to stop digging. She turned to Claire. Mrs. Ashford, I am granting you full temporary custody of your unborn child. When the baby is born, Mr. Ashford may petition for visitation, but it will be supervised pending the outcome of the federal investigation. Additionally, I am invalidating the prenuptial agreement on the grounds that it was obtained through fraud and duress. The courtroom erupted. Derek shot to his feet. Your Honor, you can't... Sit down, Mr. Ashford. I'm not finished. The marital assets will remain frozen until the FBI completes its investigation. However, Mr. Ashford, IOS will be granted access to $200,000 from the joint account for immediate living expenses and legal fees. This amount will be deducted from your share when final asset division occurs. Claire felt tears streaming down her face. After months of fighting, months of being destroyed piece by piece, she was finally winning. Judge Holloway continued. Furthermore, I am awarding Mrs. Ashford temporary spousal support in the amount of $20,000 per month until this case is resolved. Mr. Ashford, you have systematically abused the legal system and your position of power. This court will not allow that to continue. The gavel struck. Outside the courtroom, reporters swarmed Claire. She paused on the steps, one hand on her belly, and looked directly into the cameras. For months, Derek Ashford tried to convince everyone I was crazy, unstable, a gold digger trying to ruin a good man. But the truth is finally coming out. He's a fraud, a con artist, and he used his money and power to hurt people who trusted him. I'm grateful to Judge Holloway for seeing through his lies. And I'm grateful to every woman who has come forward despite their fear. This isn't just about my divorce anymore. This is about holding powerful men accountable. The clip played on every news station that night. 2 days later, the FBI announced formal charges against Derek Ashford: securities fraud, tax evasion, wire fraud, money laundering. He was facing up to 20 years in prison if convicted. His company's stock crashed. Board members resigned. Investors filed lawsuits. Everything Derek had built was crumbling. And Claire, 7 months pregnant and exhausted, finally allowed herself to breathe. The trial took 6 months. Claire gave birth to a healthy baby boy during that time. A beautiful child with Derek's dark hair and her blue eyes. She named him Benjamin, after her father who had died when she was young. Derek was allowed supervised visits once a week, but he rarely took advantage of them. He was too busy with his criminal trial. Claire watched from the gallery as prosecutors presented evidence of Derek's crimes: the shell companies, the hidden accounts, the fake invoices and falsified tax returns. Rachel testified, and Lisa Martinez testified, and one by one, Derek's former employees and associates turned against him. Natalie Grant had already pleaded guilty to conspiracy and was serving 4 years in federal prison. Her law license had been permanently revoked. Derek maintained his innocence throughout. His new legal team, The fourth set of attorneys he had hired argued that he had simply been aggressive with his accounting, that the offshore accounts were legal tax strategies, that the false testimony had been his attorney's idea, not his. The jury did not believe him. After 3 days of deliberation, they found him guilty on all counts. Derek Ashford was sentenced to 8 years in federal prison and ordered to pay $47 million in restitution to investors and the government. The divorce was finalized a month later. Claire received half of the remaining legitimate marital assets, approximately $3 million after legal fees and restitution. It was more money than she had ever imagined having, but it felt hollow. Victory felt hollow. She had wanted justice. She had gotten it, but it had cost her years of her life, her health, her peace of mind. And Benjamin would grow up without a father who cared about him. Still, Claire tried to focus on the future. She used part of the settlement to establish the Phoenix Foundation, a nonprofit providing legal assistance and support services to women escaping abusive relationships. Rachel came to work for her, and Lisa Martinez joined as their financial advisor. The first year, they helped 43 women. The second year, over 100. Claire's story had become a lightning rod. She received messages daily from women in similar situations. Women who had been isolated and gaslit and destroyed by men who thought they were untouchable. She answered as many as she could, offering advice and resources and, most importantly, belief. "I believe you, Anna," she would say. "You're not crazy, you're not imagining it, and you deserve better." One afternoon, 2 years after the divorce was finalized, Claire sat in her small office at the foundation. Benjamin was at daycare, happy and thriving. The walls of her office were covered with thank you notes from women they had helped, photos of survivors who had rebuilt their lives. Her phone rang, an unknown number. She almost did not answer, but something made her pick up. "Is this Claire Ashford?" "It's Claire Bennett now. I took back my maiden name." "Who is this?" "My name is Sarah Mitchell. I worked for Derek Ashford 4 years ago. I signed an NDA when he fired me, but I just read that his conviction was upheld on appeal. I was wondering if you might be able to help me break that NDA. I want to tell my story." Claire smiled. "I think I can help with that. When can you come in?" They scheduled an appointment for the following week. After hanging up, Claire looked out her window at the city. It was spring, and the trees were blooming. Benjamin would be home soon, full of stories about his day. Tonight they would make dinner together and read books, and he would fall asleep in her arms, safe and loved. Derek was in prison. Natalie was in prison. The truth had come out, slowly and painfully, but it had come out, and Claire had survived, more than survived. She had built something meaningful from the ashes of her destroyed marriage. Her phone buzzed with a text. "Jennifer Blake. Dinner next week. I'm working on a follow-up article about the foundation. Would love to interview you." Claire texted back, "Absolutely. Let's do it." She gathered her things and headed out to pick up Benjamin. As she walked through the foundation's small lobby, she saw a new client sitting nervously on the couch, young, maybe 25, with a bruise barely covered by makeup on her cheekbone. Claire sat down beside her. "Hi, I'm Claire. You're safe here. Whatever you need, we're going to help you." "Okay." The woman's eyes filled with tears. "I didn't know where else to go." "You came to the right place. We're going to figure this out together." It was not the life Claire had imagined when she married Derek all those years ago. She had thought she would be a society wife, attending galas and raising children in luxury. But this life, this messy, difficult, purposeful life, was better because it was hers, built by her own strength, defined by her own choices, and no one could take that away. 5 years after the divorce, Claire stood at the podium in a hotel ballroom, looking out at 200 faces. The Phoenix Foundation's annual gala had grown from a small gathering in a community center to this, a black tie event with major donors and sponsors and politicians who wanted to be seen supporting their cause. Benjamin, now 6 years old, sat in the front row with Stephanie. He was wearing a tiny suit and a serious expression, trying so hard to be grown up. Claire smiled at him, and he grinned back, the gap where his front teeth used to be, making him look even more adorable. 5 years ago, Claire began, her voice steady and clear. "I thought my life was over. I was 7 months pregnant, penniless, facing down a man who had all the money and power in the world. A man who was determined to destroy me simply because I dared to ask for basic human dignity. The room was silent, every person leaning forward to hear. I was not supposed to survive that fight. The statistics say that women who leave abusive relationships are at the highest risk of violence in the first few months after leaving. The legal system is not designed to protect us. Restraining orders are pieces of paper. Custody battles can drag on for years, and men with resources can buy their way out of consequences. She paused, letting those words sink in. But I did survive, and not just survive. I learned to build a life that no one could take from me. I learned that my voice mattered, that my truth was powerful, that other women were fighting the same battles, and together, we were unstoppable. Applause rippled through the crowd. Claire waited for it to settle before continuing. The Phoenix Foundation has now helped over 500 women escape abusive situations. We've provided legal representation, safe housing, job training, therapy, and most importantly, community. We've shown women that they are not alone, that their stories matter, that they deserve to be believed and protected and respected. More applause. Louder this time. We've also held powerful men accountable. In the past 5 years, we've helped expose 12 cases of financial abuse, 8 cases of workplace harassment, and countless instances of men using the legal system as a weapon against their victims. We've worked with journalists, with law enforcement, with legislators to change the way society handles these cases. Claire looked down at her notes, then decided to speak from the heart instead. But the work isn't done, Murphy. There are still women trapped in marriages with men who control every dollar. Still women fighting custody battles against abusers who manipulate the system. Still women who are told they're crazy or dramatic or gold diggers when they try to speak up about their abuse. She looked directly at a woman in the third row, someone she recognized from a recent case. The woman had escaped her husband 3 months ago and was still fighting for custody of her children. To every woman here who is still fighting, I want you to know something. You are stronger than you think, braver than you realize, and you are not alone. This room is full of survivors, women who were told they would never make it, and who proved everyone wrong. The woman in the third row was crying now. Happy tears. Claire hoped. Derek Ashford is currently serving the 6th year of his 8-year sentence. His empire is gone, his reputation destroyed, his ability to hurt people severely limited by prison, walls, and federal oversight. And I am here, thriving, raising my son, helping other women find their voices. She paused for effect. That's what justice looks like. Not perfect, not easy, but real and permanent. The applause was thunderous now. People rose to their feet. Benjamin was clapping so hard his little hands had to be stinging. Stephanie was wiping away tears. After the speech, after the dinner and the silent auction and the networking, Claire found herself alone for a moment on the hotel balcony. The city stretched out below her, lights twinkling like stars. She thought about that day in the courtroom 5 years ago when Natalie had slapped her. How small she had felt. How powerless. She was not powerless anymore. Mom, Benjamin's voice came from behind her. He had started calling her mom instead of mommy recently. Another sign he was growing up too fast. Hey, buddy, shouldn't you be inside with Aunt Stephanie? She said I could come find you. Are you sad? Claire knelt down to his level. No, sweetie, I'm not sad. Why would you think that? Because you're crying. She touched her face and realized he was right. Happy tears this time. These are good tears. Sometimes people cry when they're really, really grateful for something. What are you grateful for? For you, for the work we do at the foundation, for all the people who helped me when I needed it most, for second chances. Benjamin considered this seriously. Dad never calls anymore. It was true. Derek's supervised calls had become less and less frequent over the years. He had stopped fighting for custody, stopped sending birthday cards. He was serving his time and planning whatever life he would build after prison. And apparently that life did not include his son. I know, buddy, and I'm sorry about that. Your dad made a lot of bad choices, but that's not your fault. Okay, you are perfect exactly as you are. I have you and Aunt Stephanie and Rachel and Lisa and everyone at the foundation. That's a lot of people who love me. Claire hugged him tightly. That's exactly right. We're our own kind of family. and we take care of each other." They stood together on the balcony for a few more minutes, watching the city lights. Then Benjamin tugged on her hand. "Can we get ice cream on the way home?" Claire laughed. "Absolutely. Let's go." As they walked back inside, Claire caught her reflection in the glass doors. She looked different from that scared woman in the courtroom 5 years ago. Stronger, happier, free. She had fought for that freedom, clawed her way out of an impossible situation, refused to be silenced or destroyed, and now she was using that hard-won freedom to help others do the same. That night, after Benjamin was asleep and the apartment was quiet, Claire sat at her desk and opened her laptop. She was writing a book about her experience, a guide for women trying to navigate divorce from abusive partners. It was slow going, painful to relive those memories, but important. Other women needed to know they could survive, that they could fight back, that they could win. Her phone buzzed, a text from Jennifer Blake, who had become a close friend over the years. "Saw your speech tonight. You killed it. Drinks tomorrow to celebrate." Claire smiled and texted back, "Definitely." She returned to her writing, fingers flying across the keyboard. The book was almost done. Just a few more chapters about the aftermath, about healing, about building a life from scratch when everything had been taken from you. The final chapter would be about forgiveness. Not forgiving Derek, but forgiving herself. For staying too long, for ignoring red flags, for believing his lies. It had taken years to understand that she was not to blame for being abused, that loving someone did not mean accepting destruction. As dawn began to lighten the sky outside her window, Claire typed the final words. "To every woman reading this who is still trapped, who is still afraid, who still believes she deserves the abuse you don't, you deserve safety, you deserve respect, you deserve a life where you are valued and cherished and protected. That life is possible. I'm living proof. And if I can find my way out, so can you. The path won't be easy. You'll face obstacles that seem insurmountable. People who don't believe you. Systems that fail you. Moments when giving up feels like the only option. But please, keep fighting. Because on the other side of that fight is freedom. And freedom is worth everything. I promise you that." She saved the document and closed her laptop. Through Benjamin's open door, she could hear his soft breathing. Peaceful, safe, loved. Claire walked to her own room and climbed into bed. Tomorrow she would wake up and go to the foundation. She would meet with new clients and review cases and fight for women who could not yet fight for themselves. But tonight she would sleep soundly. No nightmares about Derek, no panic about money or custody or survival. Just peace about. And in the morning, when Benjamin crawled into bed with her like he did every Saturday, she would hold him close and tell him about his grandmother, the strong woman he had never met but whose name he carried. She would tell him about resilience, about courage, about how sometimes the hardest battles lead to the most important victories. And when he was older, when he was ready, she would tell him the whole story. Not to make him hate his father, but to teach him that actions have consequences, that power without accountability becomes tyranny, that the measure of a person is not how much money they have or how successful they appear, but how they treat people who cannot fight back. For now, though, Claire simply existed in this moment, this hard-won, precious moment of peace. She had survived Derek Ashford. She had exposed his crimes. She had rebuilt her life from nothing, and she had helped hundreds of other women do the same. That was legacy enough. As sleep finally claimed her, Claire's last thought was simple and profound. I am free, and no one could ever take that away again.